Distinctive, however, from dependency, world system theory allows more space for globalized powers and dynamics, as well as the so-called in-between category being introduced by Wallerstein, namely the semi-periphery. Enough of the conceptualization. I'm moving now on to South Africa's position within the world system, and very briefly I'm going to give some contextualization. It's imperative for the bigger picture to very quickly look at some historical moments. Most people, when positioning South Africa in the world system, start with the colonial era, unfortunately ignoring the pre-colonial trade linkages between Eastern Africa and the Middle and the Far East, which affected Southern Africa, as well as Africa's role in early Greek, Roman, Asian, and Muslim world systems. World systems theories are of the opinion that South Africa formed part of the periphery during the colonial era, but was drawn into the semi-periphery around the time of the Second World War. Contributing factors in this regard include global depression in the world economy, a rivalry between the US and Britain, the emerging role of South Africa as a gold producer, and the coming to power of a white minority, the beginning of apartheid. South Africa also dominated the peripheries in Southern Africa. However, there's little doubt that apartheid increasingly disadvantaged the potential of the country during the 70s. Against the importance of politics and economics for Wallerstein and his typology, it is clear that the political machinery of the time, apartheid, as well as economic sanctions from outside, in reaction to the same regime, solidly contributed to South Africa's new peripheral and skunk status in the world. I'm going to investigate and analyze now against this conceptual framework the very important political and economic sectors of South Africa. Despite the miraculously political transition in the country in 1994, the political system currently is highly unstable and loaded with volatility. Bad governance, infighting, corruption, poor service delivery and financial management, and one disastrous policy decision after the other seems the order of the day. An excellent example in this regard is the mining sector. With an already staggering mining industry, one would expect real support and guidance from government. However, when looking at the revised Act on Mineral and Petroleum Development, it's clear that the government will further force money out of the industry and is going to make operational conditions in the industry even tougher. This will have a negative effect on investment in the sector, less tax will be earned, and less people will have a job. Numerous high-profile ANC members, African National Party, are part of an inner circle class. They've got strong ties with the government, tenderpreneurs, how we call them, comrades, and in practice a new ruling class, the power elite, according to C. Wright Mills, and just the circulation of another elite group, in the words of Pareto. In song with this, Moore refers to political elite revenues. These include arms deals, steal money from the public purse through the misuse of authority, or take effective control of parts of the economy. Coincidentally or not, that some of the most serious mining scandals in the last few years in South Africa involved some of the aristocratic African National Council families. Linking onto this, Gunnar Frank rightly points to a class of third world political leaders who, especially through cooptation and corruption, are sympathetic to the interests and values of poor countries and in the process support the exploitative relationship between the core and the periphery in a post-colonial era. In this process, they are completely out of touch with the people on the ground. Frank coined this grouping the comprador bourgeoisie, and they are strengthening the position of the capitalist system, and especially the transnational corporations. Wallerstein, in turn, is of the opinion that the state machinery is always strong, anyway strong enough to protect the interests, guaranteeing their property rights, ensuring various monopolies, and spreading losses among the larger population. Furthermore, it is thus no surprise that one protest and unrest action after the other are taking place in South Africa. Most of it has to do with labor issues, and quite a lot, of course, with basic service delivery. I guess you're familiar with the Marikana massacre that took place a year ago, when one of the platinum mines. When looking at the bigger picture, this kind of unrest is, of course, not unique to South Africa. The recent unrest and process actions also in Turkey, Brazil, and Chile is a case in point. My reference to the mining sector, when I talk about the political sector, is merely an example. I mean, these tendencies are of course also prevalent in other sectors and also occur at provincial and local levels of government. I'm moving on now to the economic sector. Although South Africa experienced some modest economic growth over the last few years, the latest figures seem like a growth of 1%, there's no doubt that the country's economy is currently in serious trouble. This alarming situation reflects much more than just the aftermath of a global crisis since 2008-9. Two indicators reflect this situation according to the chief economist of Standard Bank, Willem Balling. Firstly, the economic growth rate during the last few years, in comparison with other emerging economies and Africa, was nominal poor. Secondly, an increased number of the urbanized poor are demanding entry into the formal economy, into jobs, municipal services. The rand burst through the psychological level of 10 rand for $1, the lowest value level of the rand since 2009. And about 14% of South African population live below the international poverty line per day. According to the UN, it's $1.25, about 12 rand 60. Balling furthermore states that the country lost about 42 million worker days in terms of productivity over the past 5 years. South Africa is seemingly the striker's capital of the world. It is clear that investors are currently wary to invest in the periphery and semi-periphery, the so-called emerging economies, due to numerous reasons. The investment trend, according to economists, is to turn back to developed countries, the core. A weaker rand will lead to the increase of almost everything that's being imported: clothes, iPads, books, chemical products, to mention a few. Expenses of local enterprises that need to import steel and textile for the manufacturing of their products will also escalate. If these enterprises don't increase their selling prices, the situation would inevitably lead to losses in terms of employment. Fuel prices will also rise, and the cost of infrastructure projects of the government will also be higher. As some sort of a consolation, it can also be mentioned that the Australian dollar, as well as the Brazilian real, also reached during the same time, middle June, their lowest value against the US dollar in 3 and 4 years respectively. 2/3 of our platinum mines are being operated at a loss, and the platinum index has reached its lowest mark in 7 years. Mining production decreased in 2012 with 12.7%, and we slipped down another 10 places within the Fraser Index regarding attraction for mining investment. South Africa are now the 64th attractive country for mining investments, about 1/3 from the bottom. According to the report of Nomura International, 145,000 workers at platinum mines in the country may lose their jobs by 2015 if the platinum price stays at 14.70 rand and inflation at 8%. The GDP can be hugely misleading. According to the Research Institute of Community Affairs at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, wrong and unhealthy indicators, for example, chronic diseases and motor accidents, are stimulating the GDP. The WITS report shows that the reality, despite economic growth, is that 8 out of 10 families in South Africa can't afford a healthy basket of food on a daily basis. According to the world system theory, it's possible for peripheral countries with strong state institutions to better their situation and perform themselves into the semi-periphery. That was probably the case with South Africa 5 years ago. However, and also linked on with the issues being raised under the political sector, it's not that easy to escape underdevelopment. Wallerstein reiterates the important fact that countries cannot change their position in the hierarchy simply by the exploitation of their natural and the human resources. Elements of dependency can also be spotted within the current economic dispensation. Here we may refer to transport systems, or the lack thereof. The labor system, especially in the mining sector, is still, since apartheid, based on rural-urban migrancy, and also signs of political suppression that we find within governments. On the positive side, there is some light in the periphery of the tunnel. I'm talking about BRICS. I'm talking about the bilateral agreement being signed with Japan in June 2013, as well as the recent research agreement between the aircraft company Boeing and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research for the refinement of Titan. Still on home turf, if the National Development Plan, the NDP, becomes more than just a policy, it may lead to greater economic stability. According to Parsons, Special Advisor to the Business Organization Business Unit South Africa, the organized business community has 500 million rand to invest if there is absolute certainty regarding the smooth implementation of the NDP. Lastly, within the context of a globalized world system, a free trade agreement between Europe and America that was a strong agenda point at the recent G8 summit might change the economic game globally in a significant way, and it can render economic benefits to all, but however it will be a cumbersome process and it might take years to be finalized. To conclude, the question then, where does South Africa as a BRICS country find itself between the core periphery and the semi-periphery. After the earlier analysis of the political and economic sectors, it looks like a bleak picture, and it's very difficult to determine the position. If we go by the semi-periphery, we can't determine it by either using, unfortunately, a calculator or a weighing scale. Wallerstein rightly warns that, and I quote, the semi-periphery, however, is not an artifice of statistical cutting points, nor is it a residual category. The semi-periphery is a necessary structural element in a world economy. So the answer is not clear, but what I can say is that South Africa's position is very complicated, it's very challenging, definitely not static, and that the bigger picture in South Africa, but also globally, must be looked at, which is of course not so easy. Regarding this, Wallerstein rightly states, and I quote again, man's ability to participate intelligently in the evolution of his own system is dependent on his ability to perceive the whole. New economic alliances like BRICS and other economic initiatives like the NDP that I mentioned earlier in the paper generate different dynamics and hopefully some growth. But to remain in any sector is of course also not beyond challenge. It's clearly proven by the current position of the West. And think of Wallerstein's point of regular cyclical rhythms. And the competition is stiff. And I quote again Wallerstein, the hounds are ever to the hares for the position of top dog. On an academic level, all over the world, and maybe for this audience, despite core or periphery, social scientists are confronted to a large extent with the same issues, maybe with different angles to it or different interpretations or new solutions. It must be remembered that meta-theoretically and methodologically, Wallerstein can also be embedded within interpretive sociology. And again, keep Wallerstein's cyclical rhythm in mind. And my last sentence, this sketch system of South Africa as a BRICS country within the global position is definitely very challenging and an intriguing laboratory for the social sciences. And top the last, can I just play around and I make South Africa a semi-periphery country. Interesting, I put in the BRICS there somewhere in the middle. It's quite an interesting debate. And then just also very interesting last and current debates, political and economic level, is that there's also at the bottom there a possible expansion of BRICS, and people ask, what about Chile, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, and Mexico? So this is just sort of a rough figure. And, thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Fábio Silva, who's a